Good evening and welcome to our webinar, A Father's Grief. I'm Pat Loader, the Executive Director of the Compassionate Friends. Before we begin, let me mention that all attendees are muted. To ask a question, you will need to type it into your question area on your screen's control panel. Our presenter will be taking questions at the end of his presentation, and we will do our best to get to as many questions as possible. Our presenter this evening is Dennis Apple. Dennis and his wife Beulah lost their 18-year-old son Denny in 1991. Dennis is on the pastoral staff of the College Church of the Nazarene in Kansas, where he has started numerous support groups and counsels couples and individuals who are grieving the death of a child. Dennis is the author of the book, Life After the Death of My Son, What I'm Learning. Welcome, Dennis.
Well, thank you, Pat, and thank you for the opportunity to be here this evening. It's kind of interesting to be looking at my screen and be scrolling along through some pictures. And at the outset, I just want to say how thankful I am to have this opportunity to speak to, I assume, a bunch of dads, fathers, and perhaps some mothers as well. And I am very fortunate here to have some pictures that, as I said, I'll be looking at. My wonderful assistant here, Rhonda Monkey, has helped me out. I say to my friends, she's a genius in knowing how to put pictures to some of the things that I'm feeling. So I just wanted to give credit to her before we begin. I'm a Kansas transplant, actually. Did my seminary work out here in Kansas City back in the late 60s, and then went to Chicago to pastor in Indiana. Indiana's where I'm from. My wife and I both are from there, and moved out here in 1982 to just south of Kansas City. So a little bit by way of background, and I'll talk more about that in a little while. I come from a large family, and I'm the oldest of 10 children. There are 5 of us boys, 5 of the girls. I guess I learned early on how to help take care of kids. And so I want to show you a picture that I really have never shown anybody before. I've got this picture right next to my phone. Matter of fact, I can look across the screen on my telephone and see it there. My brother Joe took this picture, and there's something about it that touched my heart. My boy Denny, the one I lost, was, I guess, looking at that picture, probably about 2 years old. And that's pretty typical how I helped to take care of him. I pastored a small church in Chicago starting in 1970, and my church and home were all joined together, and I could go over and help care for him. When she needed a hand, I could help out with feeding and sometimes with a bath or two. In my office, all I had to do, even in the wintertime, just go downstairs and around and up to the living quarters. I was very, very close to him, and that picture kind of captures, I think, the care that I tried to give, and to the other boy as well, Andrew. But in this case, that picture just has always caught my attention, and I have it framed, and I'm looking at it now next to my phone here in the office, as I said. Denny grew up to be a wonderful young man, and we moved here in 1982 into Olathe. Loved this town, thought we'd hit the jackpot with the great schools, just a wonderful place to raise your family. And Denny loved, and Andy too, both boys just loved this town. And Denny grew up, and I'm going to show you his high school picture now. He is, that's my favorite picture of him as a young man, and one of the last. And I'll tell you the story on that polka dot tie perhaps a little later on. But I have that picture sitting here in the office. He's a triathlete. Of course, has my name, and the other boy, Andrew, has my middle name, and so both of my names are built into my boys. And I can't tell you, really put it in words, just how much I love my boys, both of them. But on this case, Denny was here and attending the university nearby, and he on a certain weekend he had a bad throat, and told me, he said, boy, Dad, that hurts. And I said, well, let me take a look. And sure enough, he had nasty looking throat. So we're going to the doctor tomorrow. And sure enough, went in, and then he told me on the way, he said, I think I've got mono, Dad. And so got in there, and the doctor confirmed. In fact, he did. Gave us medication for him, and went home, took it easy. And the doctor knew that I was going to take a group of people skiing in the Rockies, and said that Denny could go too if he wanted. And of course, he really wanted to go skiing. And the doctor said, you'll not feel much like skiing, but you can go on the trip, on the bus trip. And so that was on a Monday. Tuesday, laid around the house. Tuesday night, he wanted to sleep in the family room near the fireplace and the remote and all of that. And so, but he said, that's fine. And the next morning, I took the younger boy to school and came back, and I remember having a bowl of cereal and was looking down over toward the family room, and I didn't hear him breathing as loudly as I didn't hear him breathing at all, like he had the night before. And so I went down to kind of straighten the covers, and I remember thinking, well, good, he's feeling better, and because the night before he was breathing rather loudly. And so I remember approaching him, and I looked and I looked again, and I thought, oh my God, something horrible has happened. And it's hard to describe, but you who are listening, you know what I'm talking about. I flipped his body off onto the floor, and I screamed for my wife to call 911, and she came up to the phone, and my brother, who was living with us at the time, came out of his bedroom and said, oh, Dennis, he was an EMT, he knew, and he put his head to his chest, and he said, oh, Dennis, he's gone. And I'll never forget as I turned on my knees by his side, and I screamed out, and this captures it. I said, oh God, this isn't supposed to happen to me. And I think, looking back, as I've thought about that so many times, I think I had this silly notion that just because I was a pastor, just because I was, doing God's work and all of that, it happened to other people, it didn't happen to me. And if you know the Bible, there's a story in the Bible called that we know now as the Exodus, and prior to the Exodus, it was a time when 10 plagues came upon the Egyptian people, and the 10th one, of course, when the firstborn child was slain, firstborn son, I should say. And those who had their homes protected with the blood of the lamb over the top of their home, they were protected. And I guess that's where I got that notion, as that this isn't supposed to happen to me. What a crazy idea it was. But I remember so well that I went into shock, and I think we all know, those of us who have lost a child, what trauma, what shock comes from it. And this picture kind of captures it. There's all kinds of feelings that you have, but shock to me is that numbness that comes over us. It's a wonderful thing. I have told people through the years, it's a wonderful thing that God does for us to protect us, to shield us from really feeling it. It's almost like the Novocaine or whatever medicine is that a dentist puts in our gums to protect us from feeling, and they can drill and do all they want to on that tooth. We don't feel it. And that's sort of the way it is with the loss of a child. We go into shock, and we don't really feel it, and so we go through the visitation, the funeral, all of that, and often people will look at us and say, oh, aren't they doing well? Well, they don't realize we're robots. We're on remote control. They don't know it. And of course, I see that in what I'm doing here at the church now all the time, almost on a weekly basis. And people can look nice, they can be dressed, they can talk, they can walk, but they are hoping that they're going to wake up, and this is the worst nightmare they've ever had, and they're going to wake up from it. And so there is this feeling of a shock that you have, and as I said, I was screaming out, my God, why have you forsaken me? And if in the Christian Bible, in the New Testament, those were some of the words of Jesus right before he died, and I'm so glad they're there, because I have borrowed those words many times, because shock and the loss of a child can make it feel as though everything is taken from us, and even God. And sometimes I hear people say, well, I feel closer to God. But most of the people I come across say, oh no, I feel like I have been orphaned, I've been forsaken. And so I'm glad those words are there. And I tell people, if a person like Jesus could say it, well, we can say it too. Well, soon after the funeral, soon after the flowers are gone, and we're trying to drag ourselves in to do the thank you notes, and that's another story. I think there's some we just never could do. But someone told me about a man by the name of Alan Wolfelt. I think the local funeral home brought him here to speak to people that were grieving here in this area. And I just show his picture here because I think it was only 2 or 3 weeks. And I learned a lot from this man. I soaked up everything he had to say. Matter of fact, he's got a center in Boulder, Colorado. He's a published author, speaks nationally. He's been on Oprah and taught at Harvard. He's been around. And I heard him, 21 years ago, and heard him again this year. And what he's had to say has been right on the nose. He's not a bereaved dad, but he knows about grief. And you ever get a chance to hear him, you need to do that. He's very good. But there was a number of things that I learned from him, and I remember sitting there listening to him, and he made the difference. He pointed out the difference between grief and mourning, and he said there is a difference. And many times we say a person's grieving or whatever, and we use mourning and grieving back and forth, but he said there's a difference. He said grief, it feels like a rock tied around our heart. And of course, he didn't have to tell me twice. I knew that was true. My heart, I thought, was going to burst. And matter of fact, I've noticed through the years, as I've watched newscasts of like 9/11 and the tsunami and Katrina, and you see a newscast of people who have lost their family, and how they will grip their chest, and they will grab their heart. And it does. It feels like your heart will burst right out of your chest. And I've told people, I said, I really believe that you can die. You can die of a broken heart. And so he didn't have to tell me, Dr. Wolfelt didn't have to tell me twice. I knew that I had a rock tied around my heart. And so he said the difference between mourning and grief is mourning is when you put on the outside what you have on the inside. And so I began to think about that, and I know that you can fool people. And through the years that I've done that, maybe you have too, where we could laugh on the outside, but nobody knows how badly we're beat up and devastated and crying on the inside. And another thing he said that I picked up from that conference that was really true, and I've had it through the years, he said, now, in the North American culture, he said, women tend to mourn while men tend to replace. And my wonderful assistant here caught these pictures, and I thought this is so good because, it represents, I think, so many of us. Our wives are mourning the loss, the tears, the sad language in their voice, their sad body language. Everything points to just heavy mourning. They're putting on the outside, in other words, what's on the inside. Whereas he said men tend to replace. And I remember the day very well when I said to my wife, Beulah, I said, now I begin to understand why people, and it's just not confined to men, women do this too, why people would turn to alcohol, drugs, sex, gambling, work, you'll do most anything to try to get out of this pain. And so I just mention it here by way of distinction because it is just a horrible thing that we have as men as we try to be the protectors and providers for our family, and we don't know what to do with this horrible pain that we have on the inside of us. And you can see again it graphically given here in this picture as well. In my case, I was trying to outrun my pain by working. I tell you, I would get up in the morning and I would turn on the radio. I have it running while I was playing, while I was shaving, getting ready, and I would be out the door, get in the car, the phone and on my head or the radio playing, get to the office. I would structure my day so that I was just rolling, and I just couldn't bear to have any silence. I couldn't let myself think about the death of my son. I thought, oh my God, I'll die. I can't let that enter into my mind. So I just keep myself occupied. I couldn't let any silence happen. And sleep, of course, was a merciful thing when I could drift into sleep. Oh, thank God for that. But my mind was gone. And again, you see this, I think a lot of us will relate to this. I had no idea how long this state would last. And I must confess to you, men and women alike, that when we have the trauma, when we've been traumatized by the loss of a child, it affects us more deeply than I think even I had no idea. And you know, years before my own son died, I was pastor to many people. And I can look back, and even now I can think of people that I tried to go in their homes and tried to buck them up with scriptures and nice platitudes. I had no idea what I was saying. I was so stupid and naive. And I've asked God to forgive me for the dumb things I said to people across the years. I wish I could go back and do it over again. But your mind is gone. I mean, I thought I had Alzheimer's, and this was for years. This was for years after our son had died, and I thought, oh my goodness, I'm messed up permanently. But fortunately, it comes back. But I hope I can help someone here tonight with that. Across the 21 years I've been on this grief journey, I can tell you it'll come back, but you may not think it will. But be patient with yourself and a good sense of humor, and you know, keep everything in your phone and your BlackBerry. And I've been so thankful that the BlackBerries and the phones came along just in time, because I write everything down. I try to keep everything as on my calendar and be reminded, so that I don't have to rely just on my memory. But in those early days, man, I thought my mind was absolutely gone. And you carry it with you all the time. I heard a guy say one time, he said, my grief is pinned to the front of my mind. And I felt the same way. It was always there. I mean, the lens of life, I saw everything through my grief. And it was just something that I couldn't help. I mean, when we lose something like this, I mean, it's more than just fathomable, and it's there. It's so huge. It's everything. Everything is colored by our grief. And I felt helpless, really, to comfort my grieving wife. I got to be honest with you. I really did. I mentioned a moment ago getting up in the morning, and I'm going to go back to that. When I would go to work and structure my day with busyness, she was home. If she got out of bed, and she usually would do that, but she'd be on the couch crying. And my wife, her hair usually is just perfect, and everything about her is, but boy, not in those days. I mean, her hair would be messed up. I'd come home, she'd have puffy eyes, she'd been crying all day. And of course, you can imagine how much I loved that. Come home, she couldn't cook. I remember taking her out to a restaurant, and the waitress looking at me and see the tears on my wife's face, and give me the dirtiest look, like, what did you just say to her to cause her to be this way? And I can laugh about it now. I couldn't in those days. But I remember, and I tell this story, I tell it in the book, and I'll just share it with you here. I remember one moment, one story that kind of captures how I felt about my wife in those days. There'd be a knock at the door, for example. She'd go to the door, and she had this way. I remember in particular, the Girl Scouts were selling Girl Scout cookies door to door, and she went to the door, and she could put on this public, cute, nice public smile and do the cookie transaction, buy some cookies from those girls, and pay, and get the cookies, lock the door, and turn around and give me that old sad face again. And I can't tell you how many times I just wanted to grab her by the shoulders and say, for God's sake, why don't you give me a little bit of what you've been given the Girl Scouts or whoever, you know, in the public. She had this public smile, and then she gave me all this crap. And it was so hard. I couldn't help her. I couldn't take it away. I just felt helpless. And I like this picture because that's the way I felt. The chains around me, I just couldn't do it. I remember, again, waking up in the morning. I talked about that a moment ago. maybe we would have a stretch of 2 or 3 days where things were getting better. And I remember one time waking up in the morning. She was on her side of the bed, and I was on my side. We were both sitting there. And all of a sudden, I heard this depressive sigh, like, and someone told me one time, he said, a sigh like that is is like a silent scream. And it probably was true in our case too. And I remember saying to myself, or saying out loud to her actually, I said, well, looks like we're going to have a great day today, aren't we? And it was my own way trying to bully her, or trying to kind of force her to be halfway nice and not to show me her grief. And looking back, I'm ashamed really of a lot of the things I tried to do to try to push her through it. And I'm going to talk about that a little more, because I think that's a good bit of what I want to say here tonight. Someone asked me about romance. I said, I was doing a radio interview with someone one time. They said, what was your romance like in those days? I said, are you kidding, man? You know, how do you make love to a woman who is crying, who's messed up, and I mean, you know, I may want to, and we weren't hitting it together. I'm telling you, the romance was gone, and I hardly wanted to be around her. And again, this picture kind of captures the feelings that we had in those days. We loved each other, yeah, but honestly, I didn't want to be around her. And I can tell you that this lasted a long time. I'm going to grab my book from my desk here, and I'll read you a journal entry. Yeah, matter of fact, I journaled for almost 5 years. I'll just tell you that part right now. I journaled almost for 5 years, and I got a stack of those things back in the closet. And after I finished, after 5 years, they sat there another 10 years. And then a friend of mine that I'll talk about more later encouraged me to write. And so I've got journal entries in the book, and here's some of hers as well. And here we are. I'll read part of it. This was he died on the 6th of February of 91, and here we are, April of 92, and here am I'll read my journal entry. I said, today began by taking Beulah to coffee before going to the office. She seemed happy, but before the day was over, she turned back to her depression and tears once again. And at lunchtime, she began that old sighing again, and I asked her what that was for. And she retaliated and wanted me to take her home because she felt I didn't want to be with her. Well, she was right. I do hate being around her when she's that way. She has a neat way of looking and acting nice for others, but then she dumps all of her crap on me. This really makes me angry. And so today, I gave her the silent, depressive act right back. I want her to get a little taste of what I get a whole lot of. And I can only imagine what it's going to be like when Andy leaves home. I find myself thinking about separating from her. You know, I would never think of divorcing her, but I sure don't like living like this. I get about 3 good days a month. She won't stop. She won't get counseling. She won't go to the doctor. She won't develop any friendships. She just dumps it all on me. And tonight I'm really angry about this day and what she has done. It's almost like she can turn it on and off at will. Oh God, I miss Denny so much. Why, oh why, must I go through this hell? That's a journal entry that I had over a year after our son died. And again, you go on and on. Again, this whole thing of trying to recover took a lot longer than what I ever dreamed. And so there's some, this is the way I felt during those days. Everyone else I felt was moving on. I just felt stuck and alone. It didn't feel like we were together in our marriage. I felt like there was a wedge between us, and I didn't know where to go. And you know, that to me is a pretty helpless feeling. I wasn't able to help her, but able to help our son, and I'll talk about that again a little bit more. There's some important things I've learned across the years, and some other things that I've mentioned. But first of all, I've alluded to this already, but it's taken much longer than I thought to reconcile myself to our son's death. I had no idea. I had no idea how long it takes to try and regain your balance and your sense of that you want to go ahead and try to move on with your life. And yet I have learned also that when I would share it with someone else, my feelings, and I got downright honest about it, then I began to feel better. I learned this along the way. It's an old Chinese proverb. And I picked it up somewhere. Someone said, sorrow shared is sorrow halved. And I think the opposite is true as well. Joy shared is joy doubled. I believe our Creator has placed us on this planet to be in relationship with one another. We certainly have the ability to hurt each other with our words, but we can also bring healing. You know, the worst form of punishment is still, as far as I know, it's still solitary confinement. You want to hurt a person, throw them in the hole. Separate them from other people. And so the problem is you can feel like you're in solitary confinement even when you're in a public place. We all know that. But to find someone who will truly listen to us, and the people who have helped, that I've gained help through the years, have been people, even like Pat Loader, our executive director, her and others like her, who when they look at you and when they ask you how you're doing, they really mean it. And you know that they're going to stand there and listen to you tell what it's really like. And I think one of the things that got me as a man is how many people would come up and ask me how my wife and my boy was doing and didn't give a rip about me. And at least they didn't act like they did. They never asked me how I was doing. How's Beulah doing? How's Andy doing? As though, you know, as men, we're just supposed to suck it up and go on. And I guess that's part of the culture, isn't it? Even as little boys, we're taught, you know, if we could have a cut 150 stitches to close it up, and we're told big boys don't cry. My sister could get a scratch and cry all day. Nobody'd say anything. But big boys don't cry. Suck it up. Be tough. Be a man. Man up. All those kind of things. I think they work against us as men. And I want to tell you, and I'll say it again as we go along here, I've made friends with my tears, and I have found that it's just better. I feel better. I'm healthier, and I again talk about that. Looking back, I'd say this about myself. I should not have tried to rush or push my wife out of her grief. I've already mentioned that, but I just want to emphasize this. My attempts only made her angrier, really. It really did. And she was more determined. It galvanized her position. She was going to hold on to her grief. And, buddy, you better not try to take it away from her. And when I did my little things and tried to bully her, I mean, she dug in. She really did. And I want to say to you men, don't be surprised if that happens, and I think I know why, which I'll get to in just a minute. Interestingly, my wife seemed to get better when I mourned with her, but admittedly it was hard to do. There were times when I would break down and I would just hold her and I would allow myself to cry with her. Now those were rare times, and she'll be the first to tell you. But because I always felt like I had to be strong for her, I always had to protect her. But there were times when I would cry into her shoulder and she into mine, you know, and then after doing that few moments, we'd kind of break our embrace, and you could almost see a big smile on her face, like, you know, boy, I'm glad you're joining me in this. And it was hard though. It just seemed counterintuitive. It was hard to do that. And so I've said it before, but I'm going to say it again. I'm wishing I had made friends with my tears earlier. And again, there's a strong connection between healthy grieving and good physical health. When I tried to suck it up, men, when I tried to suck it up and not show any emotion, guess what happened? I went in for my regular doctor appointment, and man, they did an EKG. It didn't look good, and took me in a step further to a stress EKG. It didn't look good. Found myself down to our big heart unit down here in Kansas City, and had an echocardiogram. And I'll never forget this moment when the cardiologist came into the room after he had the results, and he looked at me, tears in his eyes, and he happened to be a man in my own church here too. And fortunately, and I'll never forget Bill looking at me, and he said, "I think I know what's going on here." He said, "You're going to have to take care of yourself, going to have to get some exercise, you're going to have to be able to share your feelings." But he said, "Man, you have been hit hard and you need to take care of yourself." And I was able to get through that. But I have found out through the years that when I try to stuff it, when I try to keep it in, when I try to pretend like nothing's going wrong, oh man, it comes out in my body one way or another. And so I encourage you to take good care of yourself with a running program or exercise, eating, your sleep. Try to practice good self-care. That's so important. And don't be afraid to show your tears. You know, as a minister, you may already know this, but the shortest verse in all the Bible is just simply 2 words, and it's the words "Jesus wept." It's about the crying that he did at the tomb of his good friend Lazarus. And the scriptures say, the friends who saw the tears coming down Jesus' face, they said, "Oh, behold, how he loved him." And I must say to you, our tears are a living testament. They're living proof of our love for our children. And you may not be able to express yourself that way, and you may find other ways to do that, and I'll talk about that in a moment too. But I want to switch now to talk about our son. I really I wish I could lay out something for you and say, boy, I was really proud of the way I did this. But our son Andy, who was just a couple years younger than his older brother, I mean, I felt helpless as to how to help that boy. He was just 16 years old. But I learned this. He was more comfortable in doing something like shooting buckets or playing tennis or table tennis while talking about his feelings for his brother. He just couldn't sit across the table and talk about his feelings about his older brother with me. But even my wife noticed that too. When she played table tennis, played ping pong with him, he would talk. When he's doing something, he would talk. But he couldn't do it just sitting. And so maybe that's an insight into, again, boys and maybe girls are better than that, but I've just raised a boy. I didn't raise a girl. I can't speak about that. But I'm going to switch back to my wife a minute and her grief. One thing I realized, I don't know when it happened, but I realized that my wife's grief was like an invisible umbilical cord attached to our dead son. Let me say it another way. Her crying, the sad tone of her voice, her body language, all the things that we talk about, the mourning, the grief going on the outside, all of it was a connection to our dead son. And trying to separate her from her grief was, or trying to bully her out of it, like I mentioned a moment ago, only served to make her more determined to hold on to it. As I said earlier, it galvanized her position. And buddy, you know, you better not get between. It was almost like trying to come between a grizzly bear, mama bear, and her cubs. And you know what happens then. And I mean, she would turn on you like, I wouldn't say a junkyard dog, but she could really turn on me if I tried to push her out of it. And I realized I couldn't do it. And along with that, I came to realize too that the relationship she had with him was different than the relationship that I had with him. I showed you that picture at the outset, and the picture taking care of him. I was extremely close to that boy. But she's the one that conceived him. She's the one that went through the whole discomfort of the pregnancy and the labor and the delivery. She's the one who went through all of that. And she had a relationship with him that I did not have. And I had to come to grips with that, to understand that as much as I loved him, as close as I was with him, she had this closeness to him. And I got to tell you, she was very close to him. I'd come home sometime, and our son would have her dancing around the kitchen, and he would dip his mother down to where her blonde hair would touch the floor, and toss her around that kitchen almost like a rag doll. She loved it, and I loved watching it happen. And I knew that she was very, very, very close to him. And so when it comes to grieving his death, I had to understand that in a similar way, she had to go through the pain and grieving the death of our child Denny. And I have said, I have likened this the labor, the pain of grieving, in a strange way to the similar pain that she went through when she first brought him into the world. And I want to say to you today, men, this may be the most important thing I say tonight. Don't, if you're with me here, don't leave the delivery room of grief too soon, or you will miss the new thing or the new person your wife is becoming. I tell you, looking back on those years when I didn't think we were going to make it, it was like being in the in the pain of the labor and the delivery. I thought, oh man, will we ever get through this? Is our marriage going to make it? But I would just cut through to the chase and tell you today that my wife and I have more fun than ever before. We will soon be married 49 years next June 6th, and I'm telling you, we have more fun. I can't wait to be with her. I'll go home to her in just a few minutes, and she'll be there to greet me at the door with a hug and a kiss. She's the most supportive woman. I am so blessed to have her in my life. But I'm going to tell you, back in those days, it was hell on earth. I thought, man, we're not going to make it. So hang with it, men. Stay with it, and don't give up too soon, because there's going to be a whole new woman coming, and you're going to like what you get. I want to show you this picture. At the caption here at the top, you don't stop being a parent just because you bury your child, and I need to hurry here. But this is a little off the subject, but it's something I wanted to show you. The lady here that we're showing is going in for the funeral of her child. This child was born with a congenital problem, and they knew they were going to have this little baby girl for only about 6 months, and sure enough, right here in our church, it happened. And I was not conducting this funeral, but I was sitting there when she walked in with the family, and she had this blanket over. She just took this blanket and threw it over her shoulder. I had seen that blanket earlier with a little child's face peeking out over the top of it when she cared for it. But she decided when she went in for the service for her baby, she was going to place that empty blanket over there. And I encourage people to do that. I think the rituals that they can do, and even with us as men, there's things that we can do, and I want to get to that in just a moment, a little deeper way. But this is something that a lady did, and there is something within us as men and women too. We have a strong desire to stay close to our child's place of burial, and I hope I can say this right. I've talked to a number of men, and including myself, who it's hard to take off and leave the cemetery. Right here where I'm talking to you, just a mile and a half away is where Denny's buried. And I think I can do it now, maybe a little easier, but in those early days, when I have a chance to go to another place, and as some would say, to move up or take a place of more responsibility and to have a more effective ministry, as somebody would say. But honestly, at the end of the day, when it came down to it, I couldn't leave. I couldn't leave. And I've talked to some men through the years who say, I just feel like I got to stay close to that place where he or she is buried. And it's true. we do feel have these feelings. I didn't know that early on, but this is one of the things that I've learned across the years. And there is a strong desire that we have to make something of our child's life that we want it to continue on. I could quickly go down through this list, and I want to show you some of the things that we do to keep our child's memory alive. I know here at the university close by we have a scholarship in our son's name. Could be that you would champion a cause of some sort in your child's memory. I mentioned MAD, of course. Cindy Leitner did that, Mothers Against Drunk Driving. There are those who have like the former Senator Smith of Oregon, to have a screening process now that they've been able to get for adolescent children after his boy Garrett took his own life. There's just a lot of things that we can do to champion the memory of our child. Now this is different. This is one of the main differences, I think, between the loss of a spouse and a loss of a child. Now, with the loss of a spouse, as hard as that would be, we're able, and I've heard people tell me this who have lost both. They said, I was able to put that there after a period of time, as hard as it was. Both of them were difficult in the beginning. But with the loss of a child, as a parent, it's incumbent. We just feel this strong urge, this strong desire to keep their memory alive. And I want to say to you, I don't know who all's listening to me, but I'm going to say to you, it could be that you can do something in your child's memory to make a difference in this world, so that their death will not have been in vain, but you as a parent will pick up the banner and will keep that going and keep that child's name alive, and to champion some cause to do that. I'm going to have to hurry here, but I want to say that as men, I think there's, and women too, but I'm going to say as men, there's an intense desire that we have. I heard a priest say this one time, so I'm borrowing it from him. I don't know what his name was, but he said men have this intense desire to write a book and plant a tree or father a child. And when you think about it, all three of those things will be around after we are gone. And that's why loss of a child is one of the reasons why it's so hard, because we really expect our children to carry our DNA forward into the world. And so when we lose our children, we feel so cut off. We feel so, yeah, I say it again, so cut off in the world. I'm going to tell you a story. You know, many times after a child, after we lose our child, sometimes we can't express ourselves emotionally, but as men, we want to do something. And sometimes we build a monument or do one of these things that I just mentioned a moment ago. I want to tell you a story about a guy that he wanted to do something at the time of his daughter's death. His teenage daughter had died, and the funeral director shared this, and I was so touched by this story. They were in the church, and the funeral director, always before they would begin the service, he'd always turn to the family and he would say, before we go into the sanctuary, go into the place of worship for this funeral, he would say, are you ready to go? And in this case, he did it. He spoke to the mother and dad, and the dad said to the funeral director, he said, I know you and your sister want to push my daughter's casket down the aisle, but he said, I always dreamed of taking my daughter down this aisle when she got married. So if you don't mind, if you'll take your hands off, I want to do this. And so this dad lovingly placed his hands on his daughter's casket and took her down that aisle. It wasn't the way in which he had dreamed he would do it, but he did it. And so I say to you, it's something that maybe you can do. I don't know what it will be. Something that you can do to remember your child, and to keep their memory alive. And so I'm going to come to the end of it. I apologize for going fast and slowing down in some other parts, but I have tried to share what I've learned across the years, and I'm going to pay tribute to a good friend of mine who encouraged me to write this book. Dr. Harold Smith is the first buddy I called after I got on the phone after Denny died, and I said, "Oh, Harold, he's died," and You remember that my boy had a polka dot tie on in that first picture. Well, he gave that tie to Denny a couple years prior. And, of course, Harold did the eulogy at Denny's funeral. And you can imagine what kind of tie this man had on. He doesn't have it on here, but he had on a black and white tie, just like our son wore. And so it is with a lot of gratitude that I owe to not only Dr. Wolfelt, but Dr. Harold Ivan Smith. And so I just wanted, in conclusion, wanted to say how much I appreciate him. And I want to thank you for listening. And Pat, I'll turn it over to you if you've got questions, or let this go as long as you please. But that's kind of disjointed, but that's kind of a dad's grief here tonight. And so I'll stop there and let you go on from there and have any questions you might want to talk about.
Sure. Thank you, Dennis. I have a question here. My son died in a car accident in 2003. My husband and I always had a hard time communicating to each other about that day. It's like we will say the wrong things or upset each other. How do we start communicating so that it will help us both? Have any suggestions?
I'm thinking, and what comes to me, sometimes you just can't go directly into it. Sometimes you have to start on the perimeter. I'm thinking of our singer, our gifted singer, Alan.
Peterson?
Alan
Yes.
Peterson. He lost his daughter in a car crash in Colorado years ago, and I heard Alan say this one time. He said, I can't bring myself to go there. He said, it's too much for me to think about my daughter dying there. I just can't go there. But he said, here's one thing, and he was a writer and singer, and if you've ever heard him at some of our Compassionate Friends gatherings, you know how effective he is, and he's written a lot of songs about his daughter. But here's the thing that I picked up from that conversation. He said, my daughter loved oranges. He said, I can't talk about her dying in that crash, but he said, but I can talk about the orange peelings she had around the house. And so he said, I've written books, or not books, but written songs that talk about the orange peelings that my daughter would leave. And so I mention that because maybe you're going to have to start on the perimeter. Maybe you can never go. Your husband can never go to make himself to think about it. But if there's some way you can be on the edge, on the perimeter of it, and talk about some things that maybe could gradually take you to that place. But boy, that's about the best I can do by way of answering.
Okay, thank you. This is from Seth, and he says, my 4-year-old son died in a drowning accident at a neighbor's pool party 4 months ago. I was 30 feet away from the pool. I'm struggling deeply with my blaming myself, not being able to protect him, etc. Any words on how to try and eventually forgive myself?
Oh boy, Seth, you've said it for a lot of us. I remember screaming my guts out, and I think, oh my God, why didn't I take him? Why didn't I realize? And Seth, you have verbalized it for so many. I hear it almost weekly. And parents heard it just the other night. The mother, why didn't I know? Why didn't I do this? And I want to say that it's going to take some time for you to forgive yourself, and you may need the help of a trusted friend or counselor that can help you come to grips with this. But there's so many of us that have had to go through wrestling with that and beating ourselves up for why didn't we know? Why didn't we have the sense enough to see what was going on? Why didn't we do it? And so you're not alone, my friend, and I can't think a trusted counselor or friend can help you as you talk about that, and you're able to come to the point of forgiveness, and to realize too that over time, as you're able to face into this, you will be able to see that horrible memory begin to fade. I think you just have to take my word on this. That'll begin to fade to the background, and the good memories will begin to come to the foreground, if I can put it that way. So be patient with yourself. It's going to take a long time.
Yes. We have a pastor in the audience, and he says, "Thank you for sharing. I'm a pastor at a church as well. Lost my daughter when she was only 7 months." So thought I'd pass that along to you.
Thank you.
This question, my son was killed in an accident 5 years ago. His birthday is tomorrow.
Oh my.
I raised my 2 kids solo, and I noticed my relationship with his older sister, my only other child, is strained, as we cannot enjoy many moments that we would have if it was shared with our son. Any advice on how to improve the relationship?
Yeah, I think that again, as parents, we have such concern for our children that are surviving this, and yeah, first of all, boy, here you are coming up on the 5th anniversary tomorrow. And just kind of parenthetic to that, I've noticed through the years that we count by 5s and 10s, and for some reason, the 5th, 10th, 15th, and 20th year have been tougher for me. And it's hard to explain that, but it's a reality. But yet with your child, and I think give it time, and let let that child kind of dictate the pace that he or she they're going to go through this. But I think as you are patient with them and try not to force it, but to be there for them and to be available as to when they want to talk about it. You can bet they're hurting. And I think sometimes family members try to protect each other. I'm not going to tell mom or dad how I really feel, because it'll really send them back into a deep depression over this. And so family members, I think, tend to try and protect one another. So they'll go outside. They'll talk to somebody else, but they won't talk to that parent. And of course, the parent wonders what's going on. And so it's just a tough thing that happens for families. And I think that if you can find a way to allow them the space that they need and let them talk about it on their own terms. And sometimes they can't say anything, but they can do things. And if that child is given to art expression, sometimes you can do those sorts of things as well, and let them draw pictures or tell stories or even use music to express how they feel. So I'm probably not very helpful on that, but there you go.
What can you say about the lack of faith you have in people following the death, the withdrawing from friends and others, feeling more isolated? We kind of talked about that earlier.
Yeah, about your address book changing, and Pat and I did talk about that. Your friends change, and here I am in a church, and I'd have people coming at me with scriptures, and tell me to be thankful in all things, and how God doesn't give you more than you can handle. All that, I've heard it all, and it just made me mad, and so I just got to be honest, your address book does indeed change, and you're going to, through the years, you'll find people who will look you in the eye and say, yeah, I really want to know how it's going, and you know that they mean it, and they'll listen to you without trying to fix you. Those are the folks you want to stay close to, instead of the folks who have their little ways of trying to do what I call the buck up and get over it people. And so, yeah, that's part of it. Your address book is going to change. Your friends are going to change, and I have very few. I got a lot of acquaintances, as Pat and I were talking before this webinar, but boy, my real true friends are the people who know what's going on. A lot of people in my compassionate group, my support groups here at the church, these are the folks who really know what's going on. And so I encourage you to stay close to that group, because they will be, in the end, they'll be the ones that help see you through.
Yeah. My daughter died in May. Her second birthday is on Thanksgiving. Any suggestions on how to approach that day?
Well, boy, There is what I call the dread of the date, and you're there, as you come up to it. And I still have it every year. As I approach February 6th, every year, there's just something comes over me. And as I know, as you come up on it, I've noticed through the years that as you get to the day, there are people that they go out and release balloons, or they'll have a cake, they'll do something in memory of that other person. Other times they do nothing, and it probably comes down to you. And I encourage you to follow your heart. Do what you think would help you, and try to tune out anybody else who put the shoulds and musts and oughts on you. Do what you feel, and something may come to you. Maybe you want to have a picture at the table. Maybe that's what you want to do at the Thanksgiving table. I don't know, and maybe that would not help you. Maybe that would just make it bad for you. Sometimes I heard a guy in our support group the other night. He said we all gathered around, and he said we sang the doxology in our home. He said about 35 of us. He says, and then we raised glasses to toast our daughter. And they did it right there at the beginning, because it was like the proverbial elephant in the room, and everybody knew it. And yet he said we were just going to mention it right off the bat, and once that was acknowledged, they could go on. And yeah, you may shed a few tears, but soon they would begin to tell some stories and laugh, and just don't pretend like it didn't happen, but do what you think is best for you. Follow your heart on that.
One last question here. Our son died on May 1st at daycare at 18 months old. My wife blames herself for not staying home with him that day. I have fallen into the bullying her through her grief. Is there a different approach to let her know it was not her fault? Thank you for this. Many things you have said are so on target with what we are facing now.
Well, yeah, if I understand your question, not to bully, but to let her know that it's not her fault. It's gonna, I had so many people tell me, "Oh, it's not your fault. You took him to the doctor, etc., etc." But in spite of that, I carried this horrible feeling as a dad, and here you are now. You're trying to reassure her. And you'll have to do that over and over again. You're going to hear it, and of course that's the way grief is. You're going to hear it, and then you think it's settled. You're going to have to hear it again and again and again, and through the months and even years, it can go away. But she needs to be reassured that you don't hold her responsible. God doesn't hold her responsible. It's one of those horrible things that happens, and while she may blame herself, yet you're going to have to stand by her and let her know that you love and care for her, and there will come a time, I hope, when she will come to the place of putting that in its right place and forgiving herself if that's necessary, and be able to find some way to go on and not beat herself up over this. But that's all a part of the grief that she's experiencing right now, and you're going to have to really be patient with that, because it's going to take a while.
Good advice. Dennis, will you mention the name of your book once again, please?
Oh, yeah, I'll just pull it back up there, too. It's Life After the Death of My Son, What I'm Learning. And again, my good friend Harold Smith encouraged me to write down the 10 most important things that I've learned through the years. And so Gila has the journal entry in there, and so every chapter starts, and there's a lot of the journal entries in there. So it's that's the way to put together the things we've learned, and we're still learning, by the way. So
we all are.
That's it. Yes, we are.
Thank you, Dennis. Our webinars are recorded and posted on the Compassionate Friends website, www.compassionatefriends.org. Our next webinar will take place on November 7th, when Darcy Sims will present a program on handling the holidays. When you visit the Compassionate Friends website, you will find a wealth of grief information, a local chapter, and also links to our Facebook and Twitter pages. Good night and be well. Good night, Dennis.
Good night. Thank you very much.
Thank you.